Welcome to A Fresh Face in Hell. I'm your host, Jonathan Evison. Every week we talk to somebody new and interesting, somebody intellectually curious, somebody who will hopefully renew our faith in this cold, cruel world we live in. A Fresh Face in Hell. So today I want to talk about churches, but not in a theological way, but just more of a sort of serving the community context. Because I think that Christian nationalism has given churches a bad name, okay? And look, there's all kinds of different churches. I mean, my father was a minister. My grandfather was a minister. So I grew up in the church a little bit. I don't go to church anymore. Except to, once in a while I'll go with my mom just because she wants to show me off to her friends kind of thing. And she likes to have me there. So it's something I do for her. But there's this sort of sneering contempt for the church on the left. And I think that's because they're conflating all churches with Christian nationalism. And as somebody who lives his life half in this sort of progressive bastion of Bainbridge Island, which is pretty secular. I mean, there's some small churches around. And then half of my life in Sequim, which is just a town of 8,000, a mountain town, but there's like 40 huge churches, and they're all filled on Sunday. I kind of get a little bit of a taste of both worlds. And, I'm progressive. I'm definitely a lefty. But I do have a sort of sympathy for these rural church people, because I think what the left doesn't understand is that when they're attacking the church with this sort of blanket contempt, they're not understanding how the church functions in these rural communities. The church is the heart of the community. The church is where these people go for their AA. It's where they go for the food bank. It's where they go for their marriage counseling. It's where they go for their social functions. So, it's really kind of at the heart of the community. And so when the left attacks church and church culture, that's what they're attacking. And I just think too much of it gets conflated with Christian nationalism. I look at my mom's church, okay? It's a sweet little Methodist church. She's been going for 50 years. And when she started going, I went with her as a kid. And it was full, there was like 100 people, and there was kids and people of all ages and, multiple generations of people. And now over the years, it's just been whittled down to about like 20 just sort of decrepit, mostly widows, and then one old, like 15-year-old lab that just kind of lays down in front of the pulpit with lipomas the size of grapefruits, just sort of like breathing real loud and stuff. And she's got like a lesbian pastor, and it's really liberal, and they were amazing to my mom through her cancer. They called every day, and it was just an amazing community. And so, I'm trying to just sort of, in the spirit of like bridging the cultural gap here, I'm just trying to look at this maybe from the other perspective. And so I wanted to have two pastors on today. Okay. I wanted to have one pastor who preaches in a urban, very progressive environment in Ballard, which is a neighborhood in the north end of Seattle. And one teaches in a church in Sequim, which is the little mountain town I live in, which is, more conservative. Now, both of these guys come from the Calvary system, which is a mix of evangelical and charismatic faith. But technically, it's non-denominational, even though their leanings are more evangelical. And so what I wanted to talk about these guys with, I don't want to have a theological debate. I definitely don't want to have an ideological or a political debate. I just wanted to talk to them about the business of keeping their numbers up and how challenging that is when globalism as a culture has become more and more secular. Church numbers are down across the board. So I wanted to ask these two about the future of their churches, because I'm just curious. I mean, if numbers are in decline, how are they going to reverse that? Because, declining numbers should compel them to find solutions. And, so the goal of this episode is just to discuss why the numbers are down and how these two guys plan on getting them up. So let's welcome today Andrew Hirschman from Calvary Chapel in Ballard and David Rivers from the Sequim Calvary Chapel. So David, Andrew, thanks for joining me today. As I said in the intro, I'm just looking to have a not so much a theological discussion or a political ideological discussion, although I mean those things are always going to be sort of hovering around the edges of this, but I'm really just sort of more curious about what do you guys do? I mean, the world as a whole is becoming kind of more secular. Church numbers are down across the board. moral standards are changing, and in many ways. I mean, traditionally, American cultural institutions have produced people who, whether they professed to Christianity or not, had beliefs in a personal God, in the afterlife, and some conception of moral absolutes. And now virtually, all those strategies for evangelism in the past and church growth were sort of geared toward people with those traditional background beliefs. And now these people are fewer and older nowadays. And I think in a globalist setting, there's just, more and more people are more secular. So it seems like evangelical churches, and Calvary is, in evangelical realm, it seems like you're struggling to reach a largely secular population. So the Bible's encouraged you to spread the word. What does that look like in the current social political climate? How do you guys do it? And let's just start with you, David.
Yeah. So I'm in Sequim. Sequim is kind of a rural community off the Olympic Peninsula. And we recently felt called to move downtown because we wanted to be a part of the culture. We kind of recognized the shift that you were talking about. And originally we were kind of out on the outskirts of town. And so we ended up selling that building and buying a really old building kind of right in the heart of Sequim with really no... other than just having a vision of wanting to reach the culture and be present, in proximity with them. So we started there. Actually, it started when me and my pastor, used to be head pastor, went to Dublin, Ireland, and we went to a church that had this similar thing. They were right downtown, and we walked out of the church service and saw just the community and the culture and thought, this is amazing. Why we should do this. So we prayed about it, and it happened. And so for about a year or two, we just kind of, we had a restaurant space that we opened up, and someone in our church opened up a healthy kind of lunch and breakfast place. And they ended up, that happened right around COVID.
Wait a minute. Sorry. A restaurant in Sequim that's edible. I got to hear about this because I live part of the week in Sequim. And let me tell you,
bro,
I don't recommend the Chinese food, the Mexican food. Tootsie's is kind of my go-to. I'm sorry to sidetrack this conversation, but what is the breakfast place?
No, you're fine, dude. It's closed now, but it was originally the Back Alley Cafe.
Oh, okay. I never went.
You remember that?
All right. Proceed.
Bro,
I'm always looking for, because I live in Sequim part of the time, and I'm like, dude.
So the Back Alley Cafe was this really great opportunity. They renovated the space and then ended up having to, it got rough. And so our church had this kitchen that they had just remodeled, and we ended up, praying about it, thinking about it, like, what should we do? So we ended up having making a soup kitchen. And so about 2 weeks before we opened, I was just praying about, like, how can we, we believed that if Jesus was in Sequim, no one would go hungry. And because we're his representatives, it was on us to feed them. That was just something we felt called by to do. And so 2 weeks before we opened, but I was like, how can we not only just feed people, but one of the most difficult things about people who are unhoused is they're just kind of on the outskirts of culture, right?
Yeah, marginalized. But they do need a warm place on Sundays. I mean,
they do. Yeah. And so we just it was just, I would call it divine inspiration personally, but just kind of, I had been to Tokyo right before COVID, and I kind of fell in love with ramen, and I thought of, like, actually, my pastor gave me a book called The E-Myth. Anyone who's trying to start a business, I really recommend the book. It's a really simple book, but basically the guy says if it gives you the blueprint on how to take a mom and pop shop and turn it into a franchise. And he just said it needs to be simple. Anyone should be able to do it, and it should be replicable. And I was just like, and I was just thinking, about,
that's
like,
really interesting because I was kind of framing this as like running a small business in a way, the way I'm framing this conversation, because this is something you're tasked with. So you're going to get to them through their stomach and social services. Andrew, now you were in a different sort of, you're in a more, urban environment. Tell us a little bit about, maybe your church first, and then, kind of what your strategy to outreach in a more, secular world that we live in now.
Yeah. It's, we're in Ballard in Seattle, and we've been there for the last 10 years. We have an old 1960s church building, pretty traditional church building, right in the smack of the middle of the neighborhood. In some ways, it's been easier as we've gotten smaller, if that makes sense, that we're it's in a sense it's more pure. I think people these days, it seems like, they're less churched and more spiritual, or more open to hearing about spiritual things. That's what it seems like to me. We have, just like David, we have in our case, we have this Thursday, we're going to do a trunk or treat on Halloween. And we probably get 200 to 400 kids coming through that. So we do, the stuff that the neighborhood wants or needs. That doesn't necessarily equate to people coming to church per se, but I have great conversations with people. It's, obviously the evangelical church is much, much, much smaller than it was prior to COVID. And as, like you were saying earlier, cultural mores and ideas and everything has changed. But at the same time, there's a little bit of a purity to it. A lot of the trappings of what church was are gone. And kind of because of it, in some ways, it's almost easier to talk to people. I don't have to defend some political ideology or something. I just want to talk to them about Jesus and the help that we can be. And even for myself, I have a incurable heart disease. And so I have a defibrillator in my chest, and I have some kind of, medical things that I've dealt with that I'm sort of a heart guy, meaning that if people have heart problems or something, I can relate. I'm 53, but I take all the drugs. I've gone through all the, things. And so there's a lot of just real simple ways to be able to connect with people. And that in some senses has never changed. And so leaning on that are kind of ways we like to reach our community. Today I had a guy come by and he needed his one of his bills paid. I can help out with that. We're small, but we have some resources. We have enough to get by and even enough to give back to the community. And so those are just some small ways that we've been trying to reach our area. You can't reach everybody by any stretch, but at the same time, when you're, like a small business, especially if you're sort of agile and nimble and, sort of respond to people, COVID really did change everything for church, for sure. It's definitely smaller. I don't know that there's a church in the city of Seattle that's over 400 or 500 these days. A lot of the bigger churches are gone, have either left or moved out. Some are left, but it's definitely significantly changed in the last so many years.
I'm wondering, David, if you saw, because having lived, like I say, I live kind of in both of your worlds half the week. And I saw, as far as businesses go during the pandemic, less business closures. I'm guessing that church, that was a little less of a challenge for you in Sequim in terms of keeping your numbers up, people coming, than it was for you, Andrew, in the city, just because of the sort of cultural mores between rural and urban, and watching firsthand how, a lot of businesses in Sequim just didn't even close down. And so I'm wondering, did you take, I'm sure you took a hit, but did you take a hit kind of the way Andrew's describing, or maybe less?
I think the combination of moving downtown, we're on the second floor, and Sequim is a retirement community, so we didn't have no elevator or lift, so we did get a hit that way. But culturally, I would say we actually, I'd say and also too, honestly, I'm the new head pastor. That transition's a big deal, and a lot of people, unfortunately, didn't want to be downtown. They didn't really see to the vision. So we actually did lose a lot of people. Surprisingly, we got a lot of people though, because a lot of people were moving during COVID. And so we got a new influx of people who kind of were on board with our vision. And so, but we're a lot smaller. That being said, I think our church pre-COVID was we were 200, and now we're down to a solid 50. But I agree with I would agree with Andrew that, one of my favorite preachers once said, I like to have no more people in my church under me where I want to know everyone's name. I want to have everyone's name memorized and know everyone's story. And so 50 people is a small group, but when I look out at them, and anytime someone new shows up too, I can always have the opportunity to speak with them and share with them. And so in larger contexts, that's just not we're not able to do that. And so, yeah, but it was a big, I think a lot of people reevaluated how they felt about church. And COVID was the greatest excuse to not show up to anything. So,
yeah, well, it's everywhere. Now, it occurs to me again. This goes back to one of my goals for this podcast is to try to bridge the cultural gap. Because it really is. It's right and left, but it's very much urban and rural. And again, I live in both places, and I look for these commonalities, right? And I think We're living in a culture that is basically a media that is giving all the attention to the fringe on both sides, right? So we're hearing from the extremes on both sides, when really most everybody I know is somewhere closer to the center. I mean, most of my friends are centrist. I mean, I have friends that are complete social justice warriors, lefty, they, them, and then I have some really kind of, far right, don't take my guns friends too, but also wrapped up in that friendship is the middle ground, the commonalities. Like, I know these people aren't going to turn me away. I know that, I'm so whatever subject we discuss, I'm always trying to find ways to bridge these gaps. But there's a very specific reason I chose both of you, one rural and one urban, because it occurs to me that you guys are sort of fighting a little bit of a different battle in terms of inclusion. Like, we're going to shift back to Andrew to start, which, I'm thinking Ballard is pretty, progressive. I mean, you've got a lot of non-binary action, a lot of social justice, a lot of. So how do you embrace? I mean, like, the core values of evangelical beyond just listening to people, beyond just the wholesome stuff we're talking about here. There is an element of well, the Bible does say this, and these are absolutes, morally speaking, and so. What do you say to people? What if you have gay congregants? And I mean, do you have to tell them, well, yeah, you're welcome aboard the community, but I can't save you? Or, I mean, you see what I'm getting at here? Like, you have the challenge of people, and then I'm going to come back to David and ask him what I think kind of would be more his challenge. So, like, kind of where do you stand on that?
So that's a big one. I try the best that I can to thread the needle. In terms of wanting to minister to, reach out to everyone of every stripe, of every kind, they're welcome, just unequivocally. At the same time, that you're right, the Bible does have morals, standards, whether it's, the lists that include, fornication, homosexuality, liars, are ones who do not inherit the kingdom of heaven. So that list is fairly exhaustive, and it's across the board. So, I, at the same time that I do hold some pretty traditional biblical values, I want to invite everybody. So I try my best to thread that needle in love and kindness and generosity and grace and mercy. Everyone is welcome. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody is going to be a leader in the church necessarily or be on the board of it. But at the same time, I do my best. And, not everyone needs to know every one of my sort of the minutia of my stances on everything. If people ask me, I'm open. I'm very open to talk about it. And, I don't believe that homosexuality is a lifestyle that is necessarily conducive to living a full life. But at that same time, you can have love and you can have joy and you can have peace and you can have all sorts of things. Now, does that mean you'll not have a strong relationship with God or walk with God? I absolutely believe that anyone can know God. Anyone of any stripe, of any sinful desire.
Well, can he get on the guest
nature?
list if he's gay? I mean, that this becomes the question.
Right.
Everybody's welcome, but
right. Yeah, and I think the gospel predicates change. Period. It does in every sector and every it does predicate change. It asks you. The gospel asks you. Jesus asks you. These people will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. But again, that list includes liars. And who among us hasn't lied? So, it's a long list that I think, in an ultimate sense, like, here's like on the count of like sort of fluid gender, of that kind of thing, or a fluid sexuality. Is sexuality fluid? Yes, because I'm 53 and I wanted a little bit less than when I was 20. So it is fluid. Your proclivities do change some. So there are things that are like that, I do think through time, things do change. Now, does that mean that there's not immutable parts of who you are? I'll tell you, if you really want to get into the weeds of it, my wife works at the DSD clinic at Children's Hospital in Seattle, and that's differences in sex development. So this is kids that are not born male or female. Whether it's chromosomal, whether it's endocrine, it's pretty complex, but her job is dealing with 5 kids a month per state. This is 5 states, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Utah that have about 5 kids a month each. So that's 25 kids that are born neither male nor female. So this is the actual. This isn't people who want to be this gender or that gender, but there's a numerical reality of millions of kids across the world that are born this way, literally born this way. I mean, physically, So those are the people that I believe Jesus said of, that some were made this way for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He's talking about eunuchs. I believe it's in Matthew 18.
19. No, I can't. I'm going to have to take your word for that, buddy.
So I think there are people that have, when the church talks about, there's 2 genders, male and female. Yes, there is 2 primary genders, but there are these kids, numerically, these kids that are, that don't fall into those categories. I mean, that are literally born this way. I mean, the old term was hermaphrodite. They don't use that. They don't use that anymore. But
good.
At any rate,
because I almost
got to
used
get
it,
into the weeds.
But I didn't, because I thought, no, we don't use that one anymore. I'm going to turn it over to David briefly. We may stick on this one a little because I think I'm still kind of curious about. I might give you some sort of hypothetical situations here as we drill deeper into it. So now, David, the way I view it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just knowing the general vibe in Clallam County in general, but in Sequim, I know that, I mean, for a while there was a QAnon guy that had basically elected himself mayor. I mean, like the guy wasn't even, so I mean, there's a lot of this like real heavy duty nationalist vibe out there. And in many churches, like I said, I have relatives that go to a church that was very political during the, I'm just thinking, if I'm a pastor, I gotta stay away from that. You know what I mean? I don't want to make this into a political thing. I'm wondering, have you been in a situation like there was another pastor who I invited on the show, and he was actually afraid to join us because he said, if you ask me questions like that, I'm going to get so much blowback from my congregation that they're going to run me out of town and tar and feather me or whatever. So I don't want to put you in a compromised situation here, but how do you deal with people that are like, do you get pressure from any congregant to say, hey, maybe you should say something about the upcoming election or, the family values? You see what I'm getting at here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So my protege or my mentor, Hans, I jokingly say he kind of offended all of those people for the last 20 years. So I wasn't left with much. The thing that comes to mind is just so the lodestone is that when Jesus showed up, he said, he did use a political language. He said, he hijacked the Romans version of the gospel, which is the good news, which is what Caesar said when he rolled up. But then the next thing Jesus said was repent, basically, or before that, repent, and which means everyone has to turn and look behind. Everyone's going the wrong way, and so that's part of the if you're going to paint like a narrative, right? Or a lodestone for a preacher who I think wants to follow Jesus and the way he communicated is one, you have to challenge yourself and your congregants, I believe, every Sunday in the gospel, which is like, hey, you can easily be going the wrong direction. Are you going the wrong direction? And the people, ironically, when Jesus led, this is essentially what I try to preach from the pulpit frequently, is the people who got it wrong the most were the religious people, which means, and the Jewish leaders, they were the ones that were constantly getting it wrong. And it was ironically the outcasts, the marginalized, the people that everyone looked down on who were excluded that actually understood this idea because they were constantly told they were wrong. And so when I'm preaching on Sunday and when I get down, I'm frequently challenging myself and people in church to constantly ask themselves, are you being a Pharisee, essentially? Because it's very easy to hijack the gospel and hijack Jesus, because when he showed up, they were confused. They thought he was bringing a political kingdom. They really did, and I think Christians still struggle with that. I think since the moment Jesus showed up, it's the human desire is to seize power for itself, and he means necessary, but Jesus came and gave up power. And so like I did have someone, someone come up and basically tell me how they wanted me to preach politically. And I just said, well, all the times they tried to make Jesus preach politics directly, he always was pretty squiggly and got out of it. Render unto Caesar's was a good one. They tried to get him to pick one side. I just think in general, my comeback is it's not that I don't preach morals from the scriptures, because Jesus has an excruciatingly high moral, but he also preaches his kingdom. And his kingdom, he says, is not of this world. When Pilate is getting ready to possibly crucify him, he's like, "Are you king?" And Jesus, basically yes, but my kingdom is not of this world. And so I think my perception of myself and everyone around us, as Christians around me, is that we're constantly forgetting that Jesus' kingdom is a spiritual kingdom, and we believe he is one, and he is winning, regardless of what we see around us. And I think it's natural for people to get afraid and want to doubt and try to take control for themselves. And so my thing constantly is to remind them, like, essentially, this is a very long-winded answer, but basically, I preach the gospel.
Well, you're a pastor. We expect that. That's your job, is to
right?
talk. So, but what you're saying to me, I like your answer. It's very diplomatic, but knowing the sort of personality type that I'm envisioning, I mean, the people I see that are kind of up in your face about that and push you on it, if they're going to push you on it, like, what do you say? Well, if that's the way you feel, maybe this isn't your church. I mean,
absolutely.
So there's actually, that's good. I mean, there's actually, because I feel like this Christian nationalism is just like hijacked a certain part of the most conservative evangelical churches, to the point where it's doing damage to all churches, because the left is conflating, I hear it from lefties all the time. They don't understand, they don't understand what they're attacking when they attack the church. They're attacking Christian nationalism, not my mom's church, which is, my mom's church is amazing. Like, it's just, they got a lesbian preacher, and it's just like a bunch of hunched old ladies, and that used to be lots of families. And I mean, they're super progressive, and like, I don't know, it just seems unfair that a large portion of the population is sort of conflating them with these people like this other church that I have relatives in that were, literally having anti-masking, when the church leadership is actually gathering you in and saying, look, we're going to make a concerted effort as a community to make this political statement. So you're basically saying, like, you're not bringing that into my house.
I think for me, there are a couple, so I don't know where the culture will move. I would say, essentially, you can't bring republicanism in or democratism in, essentially, right? Because both have taken kind of these certain ideas that I believe are embedded in Christianity and made them the ultimate things. And for us, Jesus's kingdom is the ultimate thing, and his message is the ultimate thing, because we think he's the ultimate ruler, and his ethic, both social justice wise, but also, morally, are what should be preserved, upheld, and protected. And again, this idea it is a hard idea to grasp, but there's a spiritual kingdom moving through, and he does, some of his ethics do come through either party, but it's not the party that we elevate, it's God himself.
Yeah. Eventually,
through Jesus,
as we go on in this conversation, eventually we're going to talk about the one issue voter, because that's a lot of what we're circling here when we talk about politics. Andrew, what do you have Sunday school?
Adult Sunday school or
child Sunday school is what I mean. Yeah. Well, that's what we called it when I was a kid. So, trans person comes to you and says, I want to teach Sunday school. I mean, what, I'm putting you in a hypothetical situation. I don't mean to be flippant. I mean, literally, a transgender person is like, I've been a member of the church here for 6 months, and I know my way around the gospel, and I want to teach, and I got some exercises that, I think that the kids would understand. I mean, what do you do?
Teaching, I think, does rise to a level of sort of accountability, in the sense of, do you line up and agree with all these things that Jesus says? He says some incredible things. I would just one pushback on even a little bit of what David was saying is that, like, Jesus's followers, his disciples, his actual disciples, like, you got a guy who's a tax collector, hated by Jews. You've got a what's the guy that my brain's not working so well tonight, but the guy who's the assassin. They're basically, they're out to kill Romans, like secretly kill Romans. They'd be like the most extreme MAGA guys. They'd be the militia MAGA guys. Like, he has, of those 12 disciples, he has guys that are the extreme polar opposites. Like he has, the guy who's the treasurer, Judas, the guy who's the betrayer. Jesus makes that guy the treasurer. Well, he's God. He knows everything. He has these people that are every which possible way apart from each other, and he brings them together. And I think the bringing down of the dividing walls is the fact that like these hardcore, crazy nationalist militia guys, the most progressive, liberal kook possible, together. Like that they're humans, and humans have and always will have these differences that they are. They are. Like these militia nationalist guys, they're crazy, and that's who they are. Like, I think Jesus wants to take those people, put them together like they are. Now, I do think he wants them to change. I think he does. He wants those people to be together. Well, am I accepting of them? Yes. And there's a point of change. And at some point, it's kind of is what David said. There is an element at some point of like, there's the wedding feast in the scripture where, you didn't change clothes. You didn't come in the wedding clothes, and you have to go. And that's there is an element of the gospel that predicates change at some point in time. When? I don't know. I'm not God, but he does ask you to change. That's the repentance that David was talking about. That is an element of the gospel. Like, you can be on board with the gospel until you need to change, and then what will you do? And I think that's the real crucial bit of the question that is unanswerable by me for others. I can answer it for myself, but I can't answer it for the transgender, for the militia guy, I can't answer it because they have to answer it. Everyone stands alone before God at some fundamental level. You don't face your mortality until you do. I've gone into cardiac arrest. I've been shocked back to life. And in that moment, and this is metaphorical, this has actually happened to me. It's easier to die than to live. Living is a little bit more difficult than passing away. And, you'll face that. Everyone will. All three of us will. That's part of it.
I'll have my literary legacy, so I'll last a little longer than you guys. Couple generations maybe, but yeah. So one of the things is, one of my conflicts with the Christian doctrine, like I said, I grew up around it, so I know my way around it. The stories are fascinating. As a writer, I wouldn't be worth my salt if I didn't have some sort of facility with those and other ancient cultures, storytelling. One of the biggest differences between the Old and New Testament is the exclusion of a Leviticus, which is, prescribed a lot of cultural norms in terms of food and dress and other daily activities. It seems like this movement was designed to discourage an exclusive religious culture, like Orthodox Islam or Judaism, in favor of a broader message. And I'm hearing a broader message from you guys. If the goal of the New Testament was to craft a message that had the flexibility to exist in many cultures, isn't the rise of Christian culture or Christian nationalism in conflict with these goals?
So, I had a guy recently ask me if I was a Zionist. This is obviously a big, huge topic right now. This is we'll circumnavigate the way to get to that question. And I said, well, it depends on what you mean by Zionism. If you mean by Zionism that Israel should be a state, then yes, I am a Zionist. But if you mean by it that Israel can do no wrong, then no, I am not a Zionist. I'm a proud American, but of course America can do all sorts of wrong. We do plenty of wrong. And I think in the same way, the Old Testament culture, it was harsh, and it had this, like exactly what you're talking about, this Levitical, the priestly way of doing things that was harsh, but it all predicated Jesus coming. The Messiah, the Jews themselves, and even Islam has in it this idea of the Messiah, Isaiah 51, that a man of sorrows, that Jesus comes and he fulfills the law. He changes. He doesn't change it. He fulfills it. He's perfect, right? He's perfect and without sin.
But yeah, what I'm saying, I think more as it seems like in certain ways it should be easier than ever to recruit, because it seems like almost all denominations of the modern church, besides the just really hardcore evangelical, are more open. I'm talking to two Calvary guys here that sound really pretty centrist to me. You know what I'm saying? So I just want to hear, and yet both of you are shrinking, and you're attributing that to the largely, and I'm not doubting that there's a lot of truth to that. Everything shrunk with the pandemic, but I want to get back to this, the challenges of reaching these secular, this increasingly secular population, and at what point do you sort of, are you forced to sort of bend and make that moral backbone of the Bible a little more malleable? Like in the
Well, that's a good. I understand your
take
question.
it, take it, David.
Yeah, no. I think so. There's just the idea of shrinking. From what I've read from Tim Keller, is that globally, if you look at countries where there's a lot of poverty, you see explosions of the gospel. So, the continent of Africa itself, has more Christians in Nigeria than all of the United States. South America is having what they call revival, hundreds of thousands of people are coming to faith. There's also all these rumors, whether they're true or not, that in the Middle East, there's actually a lot of people coming to faith. China as well, apparently there's a huge underground church movement. And yet in places of power, at least for now, like Europe and the United States, you see a decrease. And just historically, Christianity thrives where people are struggling, because the message, I think, resonates the most with people who have nothing, because it offers you everything. And so there's just that variable, I think, because we live in such an affluent.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Or we have lived in an affluent, so you got that factor. I do believe, I'm always trying to be optimistic, and I really do believe there comes a point where I believe people will. Well, one, so here's an example. I've got a bus driver who goes to my church, amazing guy, and it's been, kids don't, in the past, he said, even like 10 years ago, the kids knew about God and kind of knew basic Bible stuff, and now none of them have no conception of it. And so, interesting enough, they're really interested, and and then they start asking questions, and so there is people sharing it on a smaller level. But I truly do believe if churches continue to explain Jesus clearly, again, with all of his high morals, but also just his beauty and what he's done, he is very attractive. The hardest thing, I think, in my opinion, for secular people is just to really accept all of the beliefs of Christianity, because I think they are absurd. We got a guy who is literally God. How does that work? You've got a God of 3 in 1. How does that work? And then apparently he rose again. How does that work? And now the very Spirit of God is living within this person. Like, it's all ludicrous.
Yeah. Well, and then the ark, okay? I have relatives that believe in the actual ark, and I'm
sure, yeah.
I'm like, help me out here. We got 40,000 animals in duplicate. You got 8 people on the boat. By my count, that's like 60,000 tons of manure a day, and you got 8 people to shovel it. So I guess as science and technology progress, what is a fair trade-off for you guys as pastors? I mean, are you willing to accept that maybe the Bible is filled of metaphors instead of historical facts?
In the Old Testament, yes. Yeah, because you look at Genesis and you see the 2 different accounts, and if you look at the culture that they were in when they were creating Genesis, there's a lot of poetry in it, that you can be interpreted as not literal. But
this is something Calvary has traditionally sort of struggled with. And
you mean like, Calvary? I'm kind of.
You mean science and religion?
There you go.
Is that what you mean? The conflation of science and religion?
The idea that these are metaphors. I know, like I say, I have relatives that are like, no, this is I saw a guy in the Sequim post office ranting that he couldn't get like a media rate on his Bible, and he's like, this is history. But I mean, there's this hard line. And I guess this is really far left, that people that if you want to be in the kingdom of heaven, I mean, so when you talk about the New Testament, you talk about accepting Jesus Christ or whatever, and that is different to me than accepting the ark,
or 7-day creation or that type of thing. I think just like my dad was a social scientist for his career, and he would say that science is his religion. And, the Bible is not a book of science. It's a book about faith. And yet, I think it does describe parts of history. I would say it is history. Now, some of it is extraordinarily ununderstandable history. And why can't it operate in the same way that science operates? That over the course of millennia, you discover gravity, you discover, laws of all kinds of thermodynamics and all sorts of things. And what was just sort of like an X-ray or an MRI was just voodoo, 100 years ago, now is finished and accepted science. Why can't faith be in that same measure? There's things we don't understand about the world, quantum mechanics, quarks, all these different scientific evidences and things. And why couldn't faith be in that same way? Like, the Bible describes faith as the evidence of things not seen. So I think there is some element. I don't know. I believe the Bible, what it says is true, but can I explain it in full? No. But I also can't explain the 10 antigens in my bloodstream that flow through it. And, there's a book by a UW scientist called The Little Book of the Big Bang, nuclear physicist. And in the middle of the book, he says, where does the first particle come from? I don't know. And it's of no consequence. So, in the same way, I think in faith, there's things we accept that I can't explain. So I'm okay with the mystery between science and religion and the ununderstandable or unknowable part of it. But I think many aren't. There's a lot of guys, there's lots of Calvary guys through the history, as well as just religious stripes of all kinds that need to know. A guy by the name of G.K. Chesterton said, the mathematician wants to cross the infinite sea of reason. The poet wants to just feel free to set sail on the infinite sea of reason. He says it another way, the mathematician wants to get the heavens into his head. The poet just feels free to get his head into the heavens. Like, just that we can be around it is good enough for me. It's a little mysterious, but, it's okay. I think it's okay to have things that you just can't explain and can't know. Is that helpful?
That is helpful. I'm just, you guys are too liberal. I was kind of actually expecting a little more pushback. I feel like today the majority of white evangelicals and fundamentalists are responding, maybe not the majority, are responding to the excess of progressivism by largely denying structural injustice or systemic racism, though such concepts are actually biblical. Is this something, let's talk about race for a little while in the church, because I'm guessing, and particularly, there's like 3 black guys in Sequim, so I know that David's probably mostly white congregation, and I'm guessing yours too is maybe a little bit more racially diverse than David's because of being in an urban neighborhood. But don't you guys still see that as sort of a area to grow?
I'm too liberal for you, bud. I've got like a whole family of black people. I think I got 6 black people in my church. I got all the black people in my church. No, I do think, I think, what do I think? In my experience, at least in my church, because we hit the gospel so many times, it appeals to all people. Like, I wish I could, cast a more critical eye on, the movement. I did actually want to bring up just some of the things, if you want, I've been speculating about, like, well, why is the church, or the evangelical church, or what you would say, what you would maybe categorize as nationalists concerned, or, and I think the biggest thing, in their best moment, not their worst moment, but in their best moment, I think they really, there are certain aspects in the Christian faith about God's morals that Christians believe will bless not only them, but the culture. And at their best moment, I think they are concerned with people harming themselves, even though they don't perceive it as harm, right? A lot of it is based off of individual freedoms. And obviously the perspective is very different. But what I see in a lot of conservatives that are even in my church that are very conservative, but also I think are gospel Jesus like loving Christians, what they struggle with is that they just really care about the culture and the people in their communities. And I've got a guy who's loves Jesus and is about as conservative as his morals can be, and yet he's beloved by everyone, regardless of their sexual orientation or age or skin color. And he wrestles every day with how to share Jesus with these people, and at the same time he just hates Jay Inslee, and he knows it's wrong. But I see people in that group who really are just, I think, concerned. And I think what I keep telling him over and over again is, one, Jesus is ultimately in control of everything. And two, you got to love them, right? We can't hate people. The moment we start hating people, we realize we've forgotten what the whole cross is there for, which is forgiveness. And so.
Well, so just about a quarter mile this way is a Korean congregation. And, church to this day is the most segregated thing, I believe, in the world. They gather by largely, and when I say they, I mean Christians, gather by mainly race. I agree with David, the gospel transcends it. And yet, generally, by and large, people it's tribalism. People want to be with their kind. Whether it's race, whether it's, progressives want to be with progressives, conservatives want to be with conservatives, and racial groups. The black church, the Korean church, probably largely white evangelical church wants to be together. It's self-selecting. There's no, even when you go to Starbucks and it's like, there's no, we are a pluralistic, whoever wants to give them money comes in. And I think that's sort of in the same way, church is weirdly self-selecting. Now, we do have, we have in our church, we have Nepali, German, we have, German, ethnic Germans, like people who speak German, South African, we have black, we have Indian, we have quite a mix of people. We have about probably 30 to 40% of our church is non-white. How about that? And does the church have a long way to go in this? Of course they do. That's never ending.
That's a much higher percentage than I actually expected. And
it's fairly high.
David blew me out of the water there because I said there is only 5 black people in Sequim and he's got 6. So somebody's coming down from Forks. I
don't think Forks has any black.
I'm gonna ask you guys another tough one. I think, again, back to this division, back to when we talk about the culture wars, really, there's really just a few issues that are really kind of at the center of this. And that's the single issue voters. And again, I have relatives who will tell me, they hate Donald Trump, but at the end of the day, he's pro-choice, or pro-life. And
used to be pro-choice.
Yeah.
Used to be pro-choice.
Well, whatever's convenient. So, how do you guys do? Is this a prerequisite to be in your churches? I know you don't have a necessarily screening process, but if pushed on this about, this single issue, what do you say to a potential, again, we're talking about recruitment here, to a potential congregant who's on board with the community, likes the gospel, likes your message, but they're like, look, I'm pro-choice.
For me, so I'm much more centrist. I'd say I'm centrist right now. But when I came on, I was full on, far left as it could be. And my thing is if you can get Jesus into their heart and mind and make him real and they start believing in him, it's a journey with him, and he will, to varying degrees. I've seen, if you want Jesus and you follow him, he will, it'll land on their house. It doesn't mean that I won't talk about it. So I will share my opinions. And that's, as a pastor, I'll disclose from them, from the pulpit. I'll say, and this is the gospel. This is what I believe to be ultimately true. And then I'll say, this is my opinion, or this is my translation, or this is how I interpret this. And so I don't apply pressure to those things. I do believe in pro-life, but, and I don't pound it home all the time, because the thing about Calvary, the way our tradition is, we go through the Bible, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. And so really, if we're to follow that model, our job is to kind of preach the gospel and talk about what is in there, what we're going through, right? So that actually kind of keeps us from pounding home one message over and over and over again, or one specific idea. And so, because of that, the message to me was always about the gospel, but it's varied in what it talks about.
I don't even really know what the gospel says about abortion. I don't know how this became the fundamental crux of every,
That's a great question. Do you want to answer that? I'm talking a lot. Do you want to keep going, or what do you think? I can keep going. Go ahead.
Look at them being so polite to each other. I was kind of hoping you guys are going to railroad each other.
Come on, let's go at it. Law, just laws in general, they change and shift. This was one, I mean, in the Bible, Jesus, now this is going on, like abortion, sacrificing babies is going on in the Old Testament, sacrifice children to Baal. It's a evil god kind of thing. So that happens in the Old Testament. It is true. Jesus doesn't really talk about it a lot. At the same time, the Catholic Church comes along, which is essentially the first Christian church, and sanctity of life, that all life is precious and is his. It's his to essentially destroy or to have flourish. I mean, it's of him. I mean, you got to go through. I mean, how long do you have? We have hours of Bible studies through Job, through all sorts of Old Testament stuff, and then through the New Testament. I think the thing is this.
But this is all human life, clearly, because, there's plenty of, dismembering of animals and, so forth.
Right. I mean, and the gospel, let me maybe that you get into the sort of fundamentals of it, like life and death and all. So animals and even nature of itself. I mean, the whole entire environmental movement has that sort of underpinning and undergirding to it, that we're stewards of this world and it's animals. I mean, animals, if it's an animal or a human, I mean, I would say it's a human. Like if you're going to save somebody from death, you're going to save the person before you're going to save the dog. I mean, that's sort of ethics 101. That's even the Hippocratic oath that the doctors take, right? Do no harm, but it's human life. I mean, sometimes we personify animals, but they're still, if it's human or animal, it's human. And so I think that's the number one, if you're ranking of any kind. And then from there, it's like, then what constitutes our, the level, this is where science, I think, kind of interferes. I mean, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, it's just, other than taking another person's life with a club, I mean, there's no such thing as abortion in utero. I mean, maybe there is, that I can't fathom or imagine, but there's no doctors with scientific tools. It just doesn't exist. So this is a very, very modern, I mean, literally last 40, 50 years. I mean, in my lifetime, I'm 53. So that this even exists. I mean, Roe versus Wade was 51 years old, I think, just a few years ago. And so it's a modern question that history has not had to really answer in the same way. I just think God values life, period. Are there, and even from the law standpoint, I mean, there weren't really these kinds of laws, I don't think, on the books until just more recently. So it's not something that our ancestors ever really.
I mean, yet it's like the central question. So I have to ask you,
right.
Not you personally, but your congregants perhaps, or somebody that's within the Calvary umbrella, how much is too much? Okay, let us pretend that this election was between Donald Trump and Jimmy Carter. Okay, on one side, and one side we've got a guy that in Jimmy Carter that embodies every Christian ideal I can think of, who's out there swinging a hammer at 97 years old, putting his money where his mouth is, but he's pro-choice. And then you've got this other guy that he has no shame. I mean, he revels in his own shameful behavior. He emboldens others' shameful behavior, but he's pro-life. How far does this single issue voter need to get pushed before they're just like, look, I mean, is it that uncompromisable? Is that one pro-choice? Is it? It just always baffles me that this is the center. Sorry about that. That this is the center. That this is at the center of all this. Is this one issue? When over here, I could give to you somebody who embodies everything else, 98% of these other virtues, and this guy, all he's got is that one thing that says, how does this happen?
Here's the thing I think that you run into. Roe versus Wade, I don't think is a good thing, but it is a restraint. It's a restraint on, it gives a day. Because here's the thing that you don't think of. Conservatives all line up with this. Everything is freedom. Freedom for guns, freedom for this, freedom
Let's
for everything.
disambiguate here. My producer says quit using that word disambiguate, but it's about, when we're talking about America, we're talking about not freedom of the people. We're talking about personal freedoms.
Personal freedoms. Exactly. You're exactly right. So guns, everything freedom. And the liberals are kind of about protection for, like welfare and help me out, like all the protections of society, protection for the marginalized, protection for this group, for that group, for another group. And then this one issue, it flips. This one issue for the liberals, it's all of a sudden freedom, personal freedom. And then on the conservative side, it flips. So it's actually protections for the unborn. So on every other issue with conservatives and liberals, it's freedom and protection. This one, it flips to the other side. And I think that says something. When it gets to this one question, when is it a child? Like what day, what time? Is it conception? Is it, 1 week, 2 weeks? Roe versus Wade answered that. I believe it was 20 weeks, right? It answered this one single question. When is it a life? Because life has protections, and we all agree to that, but when? And no one really wants to answer that question. Roe versus Wade did, and it had this certain sort of thing. I think it's a mistake to get rid of it, because now what you have is the crazy conservatives, they don't even want IVF. And then the crazy liberals, they want abortion all the way up to like after the kid's born. I'm actually making fun. I don't think they actually want that. But, it answered that question, that fundamental question. And I think that's the thing now. When you don't have an answer to that question, Roe versus Wade settled it to a large degree for 50 years. Even though people didn't like it, I mean, people say, like the signs that they hold up, prayer to end abortion. That's like saying pray to end lying, pray to end stealing. It's never going to happen. Abortion's going to always be around. So how do you limit it? And I think many Christians want it to have, they don't want IVF. I mean, a lot of the most conservative among us and the most liberal among us want to have sex and, no consequence. So I think this is the question that really nobody wants to answer. When is it a life? That's the question to ask.
Okay, that's a good question, but it wasn't my question, which is how far do these people have to be pushed and still support this guy that is like, I mean, honestly, has there ever been a least Christian, a less Christian candidate rolled up there? I mean, in terms of his lifestyle, the choices he's made in his own life, his own alleged abortions, or maybe they're even, and yet here we are. It's going to be, it could decide this whole election as this single issue. I mean, I like everything you said there. That's maybe David, you could speak to this. How far do these people have to be pushed? We're going to say, you know what? This is maybe better for this is actually, this idea of protection when it's so much broader on one side does that outweigh this question of choice?
I mean, for me, yeah, no. So I think just on a fundamental, just to restate what Andrew said, is that we believe our worldview is that there is a loving God, and He created everything, and He created us in His image, right? So He's the creative force behind life. And He's also sovereign, meaning, he it's happening through His will, right? And His goodwill, which is hard to grapple with a lot of the time. And therefore, every being that is created is made by Him, for Him. And then Jesus comes to basically save all those beings for Himself. So within our worldview, God is both creator. God made us in His image, which sets us apart from the rest of creation. And then God loves us unconditionally enough to sacrifice His Son for us. And therefore, so within that worldview, there's just a really strong desire to protect everything that He has made, especially and so and that's a really strong, and the other thing too is that Jesus especially comes again to those who are vulnerable. And that's kind of
and yet, sorry,
yeah.
But what Andrew was saying about these
go ahead.
protections, like it kind of ends there for them. It's like they're willing to get rid of all the protections. Just let the kid be born into poverty with no medical resources available to him and him or her or them, they, however, this is what I don't understand. It's like there's this idea that they're going to You're going to protect that life until it's actually born into a world that doesn't want to take care of it.
But historically, I mean, you're following which is, I'm not criticizing you for this, but you're following essentially the hard, if Republicans allow this to happen, this therefore happened. But historically, like, when the Jesus movement took off in Rome, all the Christians started scooping up the babies on the streets that people were laying out. And that's where orphanages came from, like the church. I do think there are people who are, what I would argue is actual Christians who love Jesus, actually will put them.
I don't doubt that on an individual basis. But what I'm saying is what we're voting here is about legislation. You know what I mean? We're not voting about individuals. This is why I got friends on both sides of the aisle, but I mean, like,
I think what you're saying is that these people that will just vote for Trump at kind of all costs is exactly what David said at the very beginning, is power. Christians have had extraordinary power in, moral power throughout history. My understanding of the story goes, when they're doing the Charlie Brown Christmas and he recites Luke chapter 2, that in 1960 something, they said, you can't have the gospel on television. I mean, they had power, and they're losing it. I mean, in large part, they're losing it. Now, the right goes further right, the left goes further left, and Trump's appeal is autocratic. And I think a lot of Christian evangelicals buy into it. I disagree with that. I don't like the guy. I think you're right. I think he's the antithesis of almost everything that Christians believe, and yet he offers them power. And I think people are attracted to it and want it. And I think a lot of people are duped into the fact that if this one issue, it becomes the sort of the guiding light for so many Christians is the issue of abortion. Now, I tend to agree with it, but at the same time, I think, if you promise people the world, the moon, I mean, Obama did it. He promised, it's interesting, I think, like with the Affordable Care Act, that number, he gave a number, it was 20 million people would get health care. There's 48 million people in America. 20 million is kind of a drop in the bucket, but it did offer this thing to largely disaffected minority groups, healthcare. And I think it's a great thing to offer them. I mean, I think reducing abortion in America is a great thing. Trump promises it, and he seems to be able to deliver. I mean, he gets the 3 Supreme Court justices and gets the Roe versus Wade repealed. And in those states that choose against it, it goes down. Now, in neighboring states, the numbers go up pretty drastically. So,
right.
All you do is really shuffle it around.
Yeah, and eventually, you make this federal, and it's going to go up in Mexico.
Yeah, right. Canada and...
Okay, I got another story, and this may be a little more relatable to David, just because it gets back to the rural. Is that so? I have a friend of a friend who moved into Missouri, to this little town in Missouri, and he basically checked out of society, and he's self-isolating with a bunch of MAGA nut jobs, basically, my friend has asked him, why does he wallow in his grievance instead of getting involved in trying to fix any number of problems that exist in the world, climate change, income inequality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And his answer is basically that we're all fucked, but at least I know where I'm going when this is all over. I've heard that a fair bit from other Christians, not necessarily to that degree. And it makes me wonder if there's nothing in the Bible about being a steward for the earth and loving others. It seems like everyone is pretty psyched to get to the rapture, and no one is willing to pick up a hammer and nail and try to make things better. Is that something you deal with a little bit more in your neighborhood, David?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I got retiring boomers that I love that are, reading a lot of Revelation. And, but as far, we're a pretty healthy church. The soup kitchen is an amazing way. Like, I would say we're a church of 50, and probably 30 of them volunteer at the soup kitchen every, once a week. And so they sense that. They sense a growing concern and alarm, and they kind of, they're concerned. But at least in my context of my little church, they're participating as best they can. And so I see them struggling with it. But I think, the gospel, if you actually, read Paul's life and what he tells us to do, post Jesus, and you look at his life and what was happening around him and the amount of obstacles he faced, he was filled with joy. And so, I think people struggle with it. But in my context, in my church, I don't get a lot of that, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of surprised. I guess it's kind of eye-opening for me that this exists, because you drive down my road, and I live down a real rural dirt road, and the vibe I get is there's a lot of people are armed to the gills. They're just kind of ready for the shit to go down. And I mean, do you guys have can I just ask, when the rapture went down, I mean, did you guys have a day bag packed or anything like that? Were you guys ready for this? I mean, honestly, I'm not making fun. I mean, I got to ask, because I know you probably know somebody who is like, well, I can't do next Wednesday. I'm going to be gone. I mean,
I have some friends like that on Facebook.
Tell me about the rapture, because they keep changing the date. That's the other thing. So, I mean,
we
is
already
this thing
got it
going to
wrong.
really
Chuck got it
happen?
wrong years ago, so we
should
don't
I
know.
be worried?
I mean, it talks about the book of Thessalonians, the Bible talks about being caught up into the air. The rapture itself is a little bit of an assembled. There's definitely
UFOologists have a lot of fun with that particular
right.
Okay,
doctrine
on.
of
Sorry.
the Bible. Well, Armageddon, the day of judgment, essentially at the end of Revelation, talks. I mean, it's pretty specific about it. The end of days, that kind of thing. The rapture itself is this sort of secondary thing that's kind of a tack on, that's more modern than ancient. Armageddon's ancient. The end of days is like that basically God comes down, wipes out a third of humanity, and kind of sets all things right. Everything that's been done in secret will be shouted from the mountaintops, all sorts of any manner of big thing. But the open secret of the Bible is that it's really God that does all the judging and fighting, and we're not really the God's army. He has a host of heaven. A host is, in biblical language, army of heaven. He says before Pilate, when he dies, if I wanted to, I could call down legions of angels to come and kind of wipe this whole thing out. And I'm going to take the hit for all of humanity for the sake of sin. But at the end of this, he just sets it all right. So it's sort of a misnomer from a lot of the zombie apocalypse and a lot of the cultural crazy nut job versions of it. His is a lot. I mean, I'm not saying it's not sort of a little crazy, but it is much different, I think, than what the zombie movies, all this stuff kind of puts forth as the actual kind of layout of it. So I think it happens on some level, but I don't know what. I mean, if you go to Israel today and you're on the Mount of Olives, you have all the Jews that are buried up there, because they rise and they see Jesus come through the western gate into the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, when he returns. So I don't know. There's a lot of speculation. I believe this stuff by faith, but do I know? It's not what I know, it's what I believe. I think that's a different thing. I think, we've been indoctrinated into this idea of knowing, and you can't know. You
don't have a date for me. Because if I got to tie up some loose ends, because I'm a good dude,
we're just not telling
I'm
you.
a pretty solid dude. I've lived I'm not going to, maybe not righteous life, but a pretty good one. I do a lot of public works, stuff like that. So, I mean, if I I don't want to make any appointments after. David, you have anything to say about the rapture before we wrap this thing up?
I have no idea. That thing is that,
Did you have
so
anybody surprised?
different-
It sounds like your church is pretty cool, but nobody showed up Monday. And I was like, I didn't think we were going to be meeting this week. Last Thursday I put my dog down because he couldn't come, and I'm sorry.
That's good.
No, I really want to thank you guys for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it. I hope it's illuminating to some people that, because I know like I said, there's a lot of lefties out there that are just going to lump you in just because you're pastors. They're going to think you're some gun-toting Jesus freak that's just, and so it's just good to have a couple of flesh and blood dudes that are solid to, speak their truth. So thanks for being on A Fresh Face in Hell. I'll see you guys back down there. You're 53. You probably got a few more years. What are you, about 38? David, how old are you?
Yeah, you nailed it.
Yeah,
you nailed
I'm
it.
good at age. I used to. I'm like a
You're
carnival
good
guy.
at it.
Don't ask me to guess your weights. I don't want to embarrass anyone.
I was just
I'm
gonna
really
say, what's
good
my
at
weight?
guessing at ages. No, seriously, thanks for coming on board with me,
Yeah,
and I
thank you,
appreciate it.
Jonathan.
And I may call on you again in the future.
Thanks for
Well,
having us, Jonathan.
Thank you.
A Fresh Face in Hell with Jonathan Evison is brought to you by Fresh Face TV and produced by Jason Botkin and yours truly. Check us out on Instagram. Find us on YouTube. Like and subscribe. If you love the podcast, by all means, run out and buy all of Jonathan Evison's award-winning novels, available wherever books are sold.